Alright, good afternoon everybody. It's your boy Akeem and welcome to this vlog. Here to continue with my grades for each team of the 2016 NFL Draft. For this vlog, I'm here to talk about the AFC South Division. Starting things with the Houston Texans, they did a pretty decent job with their draft picks. Starting with their first round pick in Will Fuller, the wide receiver coming out of Notre Dame. Now he's actually having back-to-back 1,000-yard season for the Fighting Irish. Did a great job as a receiver, good route running ability. Now I do understand that a lot of people disagreed with me with him even being a first round pick, but I think he could be a solid player opposite of DeAndre Hopkins. In the second round, they picked up Nick Martin, his teammate from Notre Dame, at center. The third round pick, they picked up a good wide receiver, an athlete from the Ohio State, and Braxton Miller. Started his career as a quarterback, then converted to wide receiver, raised his draft status. This guy is a great versatile athlete. In the fourth round, they picked up a pretty underrated running back out of San Jose State, and Tyler Irvin. Had over 1,600 yards rushing this past season and over 300 yards receiving. Shows the capability of not only running the football but being an effective receiver out of the backfield. In the fifth round, they picked up KJ Dillon, the safety, who was the teammate of Carl Joseph at West Virginia. And then lastly, with their final pick, they picked up DJ Reader, the defensive tackle coming out of Clemson. Had a mediocre career at best, so I didn't really like that selection. Now overall, they didn't really have the big names that they selected, but I did like the Will Fuller pick and the Braxton Miller pick at wide receiver just to build some depth. With that being said, I have to give this team a C+. Next up, the Indianapolis Colts. With their first round selection, they went with the best center entering this year's draft from Alabama and Ryan Kelly. Second round, they picked up T.J. Green. He is a good safety coming out of Clemson. He had 95 tackles this past season. Third round, they picked up a offensive tackle from Texas Tech and LaRaven Clark. I think this was a pretty good pickup. In the fourth round, they picked up Hasten Ridgeway, one of my Texas Longhorns, at defensive tackle. Art Jones has not really been living up to his contract, and they're looking to just to fill in more of that void at defensive tackle. I think that was a good silent pick. In the fourth round, they picked up Antonio Morrison, a good outside linebacker coming out of Florida. He's actually coming back from back-to-back 100 tackle seasons. In the fifth round, they picked up Joe Hugg, the offensive tackle coming out of North Dakota State, an All-American in the FCS division. Next up, in the seventh round, they picked up two players, and Trevor Bates, outside linebacker out of Maine. That was an okay selection. And rounding things up was Austin Blythe, the center coming out of Iowa. I think this definitely did a pretty decent job trying to address the offensive line just to have more security for Andrew Luck. He is a great quarterback. Now with this, all of these players, I think they did a pretty decent job as well. I'm going to give them a C+, just like the Houston Texans. Next up, the Jacksonville Jaguars. And a lot of people like myself will say that they arguably have one of the best draft classes this season. I think it's between them and the Cleveland Browns as the best top winners of this year's draft. Starting with their first pick in Jalen Ramsey, great player, versatile athlete coming out of Florida State. I actually had Dallas going with them at number 4 overall. I did like the pickup with that. They had to pick up the best available player. In the second round, they picked another great player out of UCLA, and Miles Jack. And in most people's draft boards, he was actually still a top 10 prospect, and in some people, top 5 prospect. In the third round, they picked up a great pass rusher out of Maryland, and Yannick Nakako. Sorry if I mispronounced your name, not too good at that. He actually had 12 sacks this past season in the Big Ten Conference. I think this was a strong selection. And then they stick with the defensive line. The fourth straight selection in the defensive side, and Sheldon Day, the defensive tackle coming out of Notre Dame. I think these 4 selections were great. Sixth round, they picked up a good pass rusher out of Montana, and Tyrone Holmes, who had 24 tackles for loss and 18 sacks. Big numbers. They definitely did a great job addressing the defense. They finally went over to the offensive unit to pick up another backup quarterback out of Arkansas, and Brandon Allen to back up Blake Bortles, who's actually coming off of a pretty good sophomore season. And lastly, their final pick, a good pass rusher from Central Arkansas, and Jonathan Woodard. Now for their grade, I have to give them a solid A for their efforts. They did a great job. Mind you guys, let's not forget that Dante Fowler is going to be returning this this upcoming season, not missing his entire rookie campaign. But I think this is going to be a good defense, a young defense who definitely has the potential to become stars and wreak havoc in the National Football League and try to reach back to the playoffs. Lastly, the Tennessee Titans. I think they did an okay job as well. I'm going to have to actually give them a B- for their efforts, starting with their first pick in Jack Conklin out of Michigan State. I think this is a decent selection. I think they had the 8th overall selection, and they could have went with Laramie Tunsil coming out of Ole Miss. I think that was a bad choice. I think that would have been a better choice for them to go with Tunsil. But despite the fact of the marijuana situation, I think that Tunsil was still the number one guy that they should have selected. But in the second round, they picked up a great pass rusher out of Clemson, opposite of Shaq Lawson and Kevin Dodd, who had 23 and a half tackles for loss last season and 12 sacks. Sticking in the second round, they picked up a defensive tackle out of Penn State and Austin Johnson, who had 78 tackles and 15 tackles for loss last season. And in the second round, they picked up a running back to back up behind and possibly emerge as the number one back. And Derrick Henry out of Alabama, he is actually going to be battling between him and DeMarco Murray, who's actually they traded to pick up DeMarco Murray. In the third round, they picked up a player from Middle Tennessee State at safety, and Kevin Beard. He had 312 tackles in his career and 14 interceptions. Pretty decent numbers. Going further on in the draft, in the fifth round, they picked up Tajay Sharp, the wide receiver out of UMass. I think this was a good selection, actually coming off from back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. Sticking in the fifth round, they picked up LaShawn Sims, the defensive back coming out of Southern Utah. Southern Utah is actually having a couple good prospects that they coming out for this year's draft, and this was one of them. In the sixth round, they picked up a pretty decent guard out of Arkansas in Sebastian Chabola. He's actually one of Chatola. Sorry for mispronouncing your name. He's actually one of the top guards entering this year's draft. And in the seventh round, they picked up Aaron Wallace, the outside linebacker out of UCLA. Decent selection, but I did like their final pick in Kalen Reed, the cornerback coming out of Southern Mississippi, who had 19 pass breakups and 4 NITs last season. Great numbers, and he was first team All-Conference USA. Now, for their efforts, and like I said, I'm going to give them a B-. I think they had a pretty good job, better than both Indianapolis and Houston, but not as great as Jacksonville as well as other teams. Now, the next time to catch you guys will be in just a couple of minutes. I have one more blog for today. Going to talk about the AFC North Division. Thank you for watching this blog. I'm your man, Keenan McCall. Be easy.